Welcome to the Essentials of IT Change Control. On this presentation, I'm going to review definitions, essential elements of IT change control, and show you a process diagram of the minimum requirements to be successful with IT change control. A little bit about me. I'm Dr. Phil Smith. I'm a board-certified family physician with subspecialty certification in clinical informatics. I'm a physician, a healthcare executive, a consultant, author, and mentor. I've automated over 1% of the hospitals in the United States, have spent 12 years as a chief medical information officer, 4 years as a hospital administrator, over a decade as a practicing physician, and I've authored 2 books, MedRec, Proposing a Solution for the Nightmare of Medication Reconciliation, and Making Computerized Provider Order Entry Work. IT change control is the formal process through which we evaluate and document the changes in our systems and products. It's a subset of change management, which includes all aspects of change to our people, processes, and technology. But specifically, change control is the discipline on how we maintain changes to our information systems, how we document them, how we request them, how we implement them and authorize them so that we have proper documentation if anything goes wrong, and we can keep track of changes and understand better the impact of those changes to our live environments. Now, there are 4 principles that define successful change control. Number 1, there should be some form of tracking which allows requests to be made, reviews, authorizations, attached documentation, and our implementation timeline, testing such as regression testing that's done, and then any issues that come up as a result of our implementation. So all of this creates an audit trail of our changes and allows us to do postmortems on anything that goes wrong, and to keep top of mind should we want to make additional changes in the future. The second one is there should be some type of vetting to knowing the impact of any technology changes to our live systems. And this should include both in the healthcare field, should include both clinical input as well as informatics and technical input, as well as business input. Number 3, there should be some form of governance, which we'll talk about in a minute. And of course, the 4th is that change control should fully align with the vision of our healthcare organization. So there are 4 sequence steps which are inherent to a mature change control process. And they should always be done in this order because problems occur whenever we deviate from this order. So let's go into them in detail first verbally, and then I'll show you a flow diagram to reinforce how the typical change control process works. So number 1, there should be a way to generate a change request. That would include the details of the change, the rationale for the change. Typically, we want to know, is there a business reason for the change, a regulatory reason, a safety reason, or some type of workflow benefit? Of course, sometimes systems are being sunsetted or discontinued, so we need to do change control because of obsolescence. So there's a variety of reasons that we generate a change request, and we want to make sure we fully document our thinking process of why this request is important and the complete details. Is it a change to a system, change to a workflow, change in some other aspect, and as much detail as possible for our governance to evaluate the change. Now, in some situations, we actually open up fully transparent request for a change request. Other times we may want to have an initial end user request go through a subject matter expert who can fully evaluate whether or not the change is appropriate and whether or not we want to fully evaluate. So once we have all the details for the request, now we want to evaluate the impact and feasibility of the change request. So sometimes we find that the request is really a lack of knowledge of how to do something, and so that might cycle back to customer service or support to inform the user that this is the proper way to do it. Other times, we can evaluate that this is an appropriate change, could be an optimization change, could be a fix to something that's not working. Obviously, as I said earlier, could be due to new regulatory compliance or business requirements. So we want to make sure that there's some way to evaluate the CR and document the evaluation, how it's done, and this is usually done by a subject matter expert who's part of the change control process. So this could be an analyst, an optimization person, an informatician, but someone that can interpret between the end user's needs, the system requirements, and the compliance business needs. So often there are multiple people involved in the evaluation step. Third, we want to make sure that we have some type of authorization process. This is typically done through a change control board or CCB, and they greenlight any moves into design, build, test, and validate. And this is a preliminary authorization. Often there may be an authorization to go into a certification environment, which is a transition environment to test the change and fully evaluate it, and then it may be brought back to the change control board for further review once the impact of the change has been fully vetted. Finally, we want to implement the change request, and that ultimately is about moving it into the live or production environment. So let's look at this from the idea of a decision algorithm. We start up in the top left corner. There's a change requested by the system. It could be requested by an end user or an internal IT user. Second, the question we have is there existing change request for the problem? If there is, we may need to update the change request. But if there's not an existing change request, then we're going to generate that change request into our system, document the request in our change request database according to our established policies and procedures. Then we're going to go through our iterative process to evaluate the change request. During that evaluation, someone will be determining is the change appropriate. If it's not, we're going to notify the requester. If it is appropriate, we want to evaluate can the change successfully occur at this time. If not, we want to make sure we have a feedback loop to the requester that it's been tabled for further evaluation in the future or denied at this time. If the change can occur and is appropriate, the next question is it routine or emergency? If it's an emergency change, it may go to some type of executive approval, but if it's not an emergency, then we're going to consider it routine, place it on the change control board agenda where it will be vetted at our next change control meeting. Now, change control may have subcommittees that work with it. There may be a technical change control, a clinical change control, and a business systems change control. But ultimately, there should be a final executive change control that approves or disapproves it. So if it has been approved by executive approval, it still needs to go back to the executive change control for authorization and documentation of more formal change control approval. If it's approved, then we can successfully implement it. As I said, we may be implementing it transitionally into a testing or a certification domain, and that may cycle back to change control with the results. But in most cases, once we're going into the production change control, there should be a iterative process, which I didn't detail here, where we do system testing and regression testing to make sure the change did not create any new problems or disrupt any prior systems. If it's not approved, then there may be further evaluation needed, but if there's not, then we notify the requester again that the change will not be occurring. And so often I see that we don't have these appropriate feedback loops to notify the requester. So you'll notice that all of the areas in orange do have iterative processes within them, but I want to just cover these 4 basic things because often these get out of sequence. We have things implemented before they're authorized. We have things authorized before they're fully evaluated. We have them evaluated before there's a documented audit trail started. And most of our problems occur when we don't keep these 4 major concepts in the proper sequence. So I'd like to review the warning signs of poor change control in your organization. First one is instances where the change control board is not meeting regularly, or they have attendance problems, which means that change control is not getting the appropriate priority in the organization, which can lead to improper vetting, inadequate vetting, or poor decision making, as well as delay in getting new changes into the system. Second is frequent emergency changes to the system or product. Obviously, emergency changes should be rare. And if emergencies are occurring on a frequent basis, it could be due to change control board not meeting regularly, or it could mean that your change control is not adequately evaluating changes and you're having a lot of emergencies to undo poorly implemented changes to the system. So certainly these are signs that you need to be digging deeper and looking for potential problems in your change control process. Obviously, if you're having high incidence of your change mishaps, like frequent downtimes, unintended consequences, and unsuccessful implementation, again, these are red flags that your system is not as good as it should be. And if you're not having change control compliance audits and looking through to make sure the steps have been followed appropriately, you may not have the adequate accountability in your process, and you probably are out of compliance with other processes as well. So these 4 things to me are fingernails on your on your blackboard, and if they're occurring, I would dig deeper and look at your problems and how you're doing it. So in summary, IT change control provides discipline and audit trail for our systems and product changes, and mature organizations maintain a defined process for change control. And remember, you generate, evaluate, authorize, and implement in that order. Otherwise, you are risking more problems than you need to be having. I hope you find this helpful and will join us for other IT topics.